Hello there, and welcome to Forgotten Worlds. My name is Thomas, and tonight I'd like to invite you into a question that drifts quietly at the edges of science and imagination. It is not the kind of question you'll find in textbooks or news feeds, but the kind that whispers when you stare too long at the stars or feel the age of the rocks beneath your feet. What if Earth was once ruled, not by us, but by another intelligence? Not aliens visiting from far away, but something born here, something that belonged to this planet as much as the oceans, the forests, or the mountains do. Perhaps reptilian minds that looked out from ancient eyes, or cephalopod thinkers who built their kingdoms beneath the waves, or even something stranger, a civilization we could hardly recognize as such. Think of how short our time has been, a few 100,000 years of humanity, barely a breath compared to Earth's 4.5 billion. Civilizations like ours rise, flourish, and vanish in less than the blink of geological time. If there were others before us, their traces could already have been swallowed by the planet's restless skin. Mountains rise, oceans erase. Continents drift, bones dissolve, history forgets. This isn't a debate, and we won't be rushing to conclusions. Tonight, this is simply an exploration, a gentle walk through the vastness of deep time, through myths and fossils, through whispers of lost rulers and the erasures of stone. So settle in, let your mind soften, let the day fade. Together, we'll drift back, further than history, further than memory, into the possibility that Earth has carried other civilizations long before us, and may yet again. And to begin, we must first understand just how vast time itself really island. When we speak of history, we often mean a few centuries, maybe a few thousand years if we are feeling ambitious. The rise and fall of empires, the slow spread of agriculture, the spark of writing, the march of armies across continents, all of this feels impossibly old to us. And yet, on the scale of Earth, those millennia are little more than the last breath of a long and restless song. Our planet is about 4.5 billion years old. Try to let that number sit in your mind for a moment. 4,500 million years. A stretch of time so great it swallows entire civilizations, entire species, entire continents, without leaving much more than a whisper in stone. Humanity as Homo sapiens has only existed for perhaps 300 years. That is less than 0.1% of Earth's total age. If Earth's life was written as a single day, we would arrive only in the final seconds before midnight. Think of your own lifetime. The moments that already feel distant, a childhood memory, an old photograph, a story your grandparents told you. Now imagine multiplying that span not by decades, not by centuries, but by millions upon millions of years. In that immensity, entire worlds could rise, flourish, and fall without ever touching our record. Civilizations as grand as ours, or stranger still, could live their whole story between the ticks of the planet's slow clock. Deep time is not just long, it is transformative. Continents drift like rafts across a molten sea, colliding and tearing apart again. Oceans appear, disappear, and return in different shapes. Mountain ranges taller than the Himalayas rise to pierce the sky, then crumble into sand. Every few 100 million years, Earth remakes its face so completely that if you were to walk across it, you might not recognize a single outline. And yet, we humans measure our past in fragile markers, clay tablets, carved stones, ruins half buried in dust. Even the pyramids of Egypt, which feel eternal to us, are only 400-500 years old. A blink, a flicker, compared to the rolling ages of the planet. If our monuments already weather, crack, and fade in just a few millennia, what hope would they have of surviving millions of years? This is where the imagination begins to stir, because if our own traces are so vulnerable, what of others? What if, long before us, there were minds on this planet capable of thought, of invention, of society? Not human minds, but something different. Minds shaped by the same evolutionary pressures, yet following other paths, reptilian, aquatic, perhaps even plant-like or entirely alien in form, though native to this soil. If such beings lived here, the chances are high that their records, their architectures, their very bones have already been erased. To grasp this possibility, we must lean into the idea of cycles. Earth is not a static cradle where life simply grows upward in a single line. It is a restless engine. Catastrophes strike asteroids, volcanic supereruptions, ice ages that freeze the oceans solid. Each time, the slate is scrubbed almost clean, whole ecosystems vanish, and with them any traces of intelligence that might have blossomed. If humanity were erased tomorrow, given 10 million years, there might be almost no sign that we had ever been here. The fossil record, even for the most abundant creatures, is notoriously sparse. For every billion organisms that have lived, only a tiny handful ever leave fossils behind. For an industrial civilization, the odds of recognition across deep time are slimmer still. And so, deep time is both a record and an eraser. It tells us that countless ages have come and gone, but it hides their details in silence. We know, for example, that dinosaurs ruled the land for over 165 million years. That is nearly 600 times longer than humans have existed. If intelligence were a rare but not unique outcome of evolution, is it so unthinkable that within such vast stretches of opportunity, some species might have crossed the threshold into self-awareness, tool use, or even civilization? Perhaps not. Imagine for a moment walking across an ancient shoreline 100 million years ago. You see creatures moving in ways both familiar and strange. Some hunt, some graze, some tend to their young. You would not see cities, no skyscrapers or ships. But could there have been intelligence that left no cities behind? Could thought itself, unbound by our assumptions, have taken another shape? The vastness of time allows for countless experiments. Life does not rush, and evolution does not hurry. What takes us thousands of years might have taken other beings millions. Or perhaps they moved more quickly, rising to complexity and fading again before Earth even shifted its continents into their present positions. The possibility is there, nestled in the silence of the rocks. And here is the humbling part. We cannot prove otherwise. We cannot say with certainty that intelligence has never walked this world before us. We can only say that if it did, time has been an expert at hiding the evidence. The continents themselves recycle their skin every few 100 million years. Ocean floors are pulled under and reborn in fire. Fossils are rare, artifacts even rarer. What survives, survives only by chance. You might ask then, if civilizations have risen before us, why have we not found their ruins? The answer may be as simple as this: ruins do not last. Consider our own world. Leave a modern city untended for a century, and vegetation claims it. 1,000 years, and little remains but stone foundations. 1,000,000 years, and all is gone. 100 million, nothing would be left, not even memory. So when we stand on the shore of deep time, gazing into billions of years, we must admit the possibility that Earth has hosted rulers before us, minds now dust, stories now erased. Not aliens, not myths, but earth-born intelligences, as real as us, though forgotten, and perhaps in this reflection we see something about ourselves, that we are not the first, that we will not be the last. That intelligence itself may be less a crown and more a wave rising, breaking, and vanishing into the sea, only to rise again when conditions allow. Take a slow breath here. Feel the smallness of your own life, your own years, against the canvas of 4.5 billion. A childhood, a civilization, a species, they are all brief in the face of time. And yet, in that brevity, they matter, for they are part of the cycle. And that brings us to the question at the heart of this journey. If civilizations could rise and vanish countless times, how would we ever know they were here? What signs, if any, could remain? And what does it mean for us to be just one chapter in a book still being written? When we imagine the past, we tend to picture it as a storybook laid out neatly behind us, each page still there, waiting to be turned. But Earth does not keep a library. It is not an archivist. It is more like an artist who paints, then scrapes the canvas clean to paint again, over and over, each masterpiece built on the ashes of the last. The planet's crust, the very surface we stand upon, is not permanent. It drifts, bends, and is swallowed back into the deep furnace of the mantle. Over millions of years, entire oceans vanish into trenches, mountain ranges crumble, and new continents form. The oldest ocean floor anywhere on Earth today is only about 200 million years old, which sounds ancient to us, but is less than 5% of the planet's age. All the rest has already been recycled, pulled into the Earth and melted down like forgotten metal. If any civilization once built its cities by the sea, those coasts are now gone, their evidence devoured by tectonics. Even on land, permanence is an illusion. Stone is worn away by wind, water, and ice. Sand buries ruins, rivers cut valleys, glaciers grind continents to powder. A monument that feels eternal in the span of human memory can be erased in a geological blink. The pyramids of Egypt may stand for a few tens of thousands of years, but even they will not outlast deep time. Their stone will crumble, their sand will scatter. Fossils, those rare postcards from ancient worlds, remind us how selective memory can be. For every billion organisms that have ever lived, only a tiny fraction left fossils behind. Most creatures dissolve, rot, or are consumed by others. To become a fossil requires exquisite timing, death in the right environment, rapid burial, mineral replacement, protection from erosion, and then the unlikely fortune of being exposed at the surface millions of years later for someone to find. Without this perfect alignment, life leaves no trace. That means the fossil record, which feels so rich to us, is really a broken mosaic with most pieces missing. It tells us that dinosaurs existed, but not the full detail of their colors, their voices, their societies. It shows us glimpses of trilobites and ammonites, but we do not know the full texture of their lives. It is not a diary, only a scattered handful of snapshots. Now imagine applying that same filter to civilizations. A city is not naturally fossilized. A tool left on the ground does not turn to stone. Our machines, our plastics, even our metals left long enough, they corrode, they fracture, they vanish. In just a few thousand years, most evidence of human civilization would be invisible. In a million years, almost all would be gone. In 10 million, it would be as though we had never been. If that is true for us, then what of others? What if an intelligent species rose during the age of the dinosaurs, perhaps in some forgotten corner of the Triassic or the Cretaceous? What if cephalopods once created societies in the shallow seas of the Devonian? If they did, their stories have been wiped clean. Their ruins, if they had any, have been ground into dust, swept beneath oceans, or folded into mountains. Their bones, if bones they had, are almost certainly gone. The erasure of history is not just physical, it is conceptual, because when the traces grow too faint, we no longer recognize them for what they were. A layer of unusual isotopes might be interpreted as a natural anomaly. An unexplained deposit of minerals might be dismissed as chance. A pattern in stone might be seen as geological when it was once architectural. In this way, even when traces remain, their meaning can be lost to time. Think of how much we ourselves have forgotten within the narrow span of human history. Great libraries have burned Alexandria, Nalanda, countless archives, and with them, whole centuries of thought vanished overnight. Languages die, scripts become unreadable. Entire cultures leave behind ruins we still struggle to interpret. The Indus Valley script, for example, remains undeciphered after thousands of years. That is within our own human chapter. Imagine then the difficulty of reading the record of a species that lived 100 million years ago. Geology has a ruthless honesty. It shows us what survives, and it hides the rest. It tells us that absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Just because we have found no traces of earlier civilizations does not mean they never existed. It may only mean that Earth has done what it always does, wiped the slate clean. And perhaps this is why myths cling so stubbornly to memory. Human cultures across the globe tell stories of ancient beings, serpent rulers, sky kings, teachers from before our time. These myths may not be literal records, but they may preserve a kind of shadow memory, a fragment that survived not in stone but in story. Because where geology erases, storytelling endures, passed from mouth to mouth across generations. Imagine, then, a world where civilizations have risen and fallen many times, each erased physically, yet faintly remembered in archetype and legend. The flood myths that appear across cultures. The stories of golden ages now lost. The tales of beings who ruled before humanity. Are these only dreams? Or are they echoes, the last whispers of histories that geology has buried? This is the paradox of deep time. It is vast enough to contain endless possibilities, and it is efficient enough to erase nearly all of them. Civilizations could have appeared, thrived, and vanished without a trace, their memory scattered into dust and their works swallowed into stone. And as we walk through this erasure, we are left with the humbling thought, perhaps we are not the first, perhaps we are not unique. Perhaps the earth has carried many rulers, each forgotten in turn, each erased by the patient hand of time. But if this is true, then the challenge becomes clear. How would we recognize their existence? What faint signals might survive in the rocks, in the oceans, in the myths we still tell? And what would it mean for us if we, too, are destined to be erased? To search for traces of earlier intelligences, we must first look at the rulers of Earth who came long before us. For more than 165 million years, dinosaurs dominated land, air, and even parts of the sea. Their reign was not a brief spark like ours, but a vast empire written into the bones of deep time. By comparison, humanity's entire existence is shorter than a single breath in that age. If intelligence can arise once, why not then? Among the many species that walked the Mesozoic Earth, one stands out for its eerie potential: Troodon. It was a small bird-like predator, no larger than a human child, but with eyes set forward for depth perception, grasping hands with semi-opposable fingers, and a brain-to-body ratio far higher than most of its kin. Some paleontologists have gone so far as to imagine what might have happened if Troodon had continued to evolve. They called their thought experiment the dinosauroid. Picture it: a creature upright, balanced on strong hind legs, with three-fingered hands capable of precision grip. Its head, large and rounded, with forward-facing eyes. Its brain expanded beyond that of any reptile we know. The dinosauroid, as conceived, looked uncannily humanoid, a reptilian echo of ourselves. Perhaps too humanoid, critics said, a projection of our own form onto another lineage. But the point was not to claim this was inevitable. The point was to remind us that intelligence is not limited to mammals, and that the potential for mind may have existed long before we arrived. Imagine walking through a Cretaceous forest. The air is heavy, warm, laced with the scent of ferns and conifers. In the undergrowth, a pair of bright eyes watch you. Not just animal eyes, but eyes aware, calculating, curious. Troodon may have hunted in packs. It may have used communication more complex than simple calls. It may have experimented with problem-solving, using its cleverness not just to survive, but to shape its environment in subtle ways. Now stretch that thought across millions of years. If conditions had aligned differently, could such creatures have developed cultures, languages, even technology? The Mesozoic lasted far longer than the entire history of mammals so far. time was not lacking? What if somewhere in those rolling eons, one branch of dinosaurian evolution pushed beyond survival into something more? The fossil record cannot answer this directly, and perhaps it never will. As we've seen, fossils are rare, selective, and silent about the finer details of behavior. They tell us bones and teeth, but not thoughts. They show us claws, but not stories. So when we imagine intelligent dinosaurs, we are peering into one of the blank spaces, one of the vast stretches of possibility hidden by time's erasure. There is another dimension to consider: the speed of evolution. Human intelligence arose quickly in geological terms. In just a few million years, apes with simple tools became beings who could split atoms and launch satellites. If dinosaurs had hundreds of millions of years, could not a similar leap have happened at least once? Perhaps not everywhere, not universally, but in one lineage, one corner of the world, one forgotten branch of the tree. And yet, skeptics argue, if intelligence did arise, why did it not persist? Why was it not passed down, shared, spread? Perhaps the answer is catastrophe. The asteroid that ended the Cretaceous 66 million years ago was merciless. It ended countless lineages in an instant. If there had been an intelligent species, reptilian, tool-making, society-building, they too could have been snuffed out in that fiery moment, their traces destroyed with the forests that burned and the seas that boiled. But let's linger with the possibility, because possibility is where wonder lives. What if the dinosaurs were not only rulers of their time, but experimenters in intelligence? What if, long before humanity, Earth had already seen a spark of thought, a civilization scaled to reptilian minds, lost when the sky fell? Consider how myths often speak of serpent beings, reptilian gods, scaled rulers who brought knowledge. Could these stories, passed through the filter of imagination and dream, be distant echoes of a truth the Earth itself has erased? Perhaps. Or perhaps they are only symbols, born of our own fascination with power and danger. But when you place those myths alongside the fact of dinosaurs' long reign, the question lingers. Are we remembering something we never knew? It is important to pause here. This is not a claim of certainty. We do not say intelligent dinosaurs existed. We say only that time allowed for it, that evolution is capable of it, and that the fossil record would likely fail to preserve it. Against 165 million years of dominance, the idea does not feel impossible. Now, take a breath and imagine. A civilization not built of stone and steel, but of materials now long gone. Perhaps nests woven into vast arboreal networks. Perhaps tools of bone or shell that left no trace. Perhaps rituals, languages, cultures that existed only in sound and memory, lost forever when their makers perished. A world of reptilian philosophers and hunters, erased by time's patient hand. Even if no such civilization ever was, the thought humbles us. It reminds us that humanity's story is not inevitable, not guaranteed. Intelligence is a fragile branch, and we are simply one of its fruits. Perhaps there were others before us. Perhaps there will be others after us. And that brings us gently toward another layer of this mystery. The myths we still tell of reptilian rulers, serpent gods, scaled beings of immense power. Could those stories be shadows of memory, or are they only the dreams of our own imagination? To answer, we must step from fossil beds into folklore, from bones into myth. When bones fail to speak, we often turn to stories. And stories, unlike fossils, do not need the perfect conditions of rapid burial or mineralization to endure. They travel through time, carried on breath and memory, shifting shape with every telling but still clinging to a core. Around the world, across cultures that never met, we find the persistent image of the serpent, scaled, powerful, and often, curiously, intelligent. In Mesopotamia, one of the cradles of civilization, myths tell of Ningishzida, a serpent god sometimes depicted with a human body and the head of a snake. His name translates as Lord of the Good Tree, a figure of wisdom, fertility, and the underworld. In the same region, the Anunnaki deities associated with knowledge and rulership are sometimes described in ways that echo reptilian imagery. In Egypt, the serpent appears as Apophis, a vast coiled being representing chaos, forever battling the sun god Ra. Yet serpents were not only feared, they were also revered. The cobra goddess Wadjet was a protector of kingship, her hooded form emblazoned on crowns. To wear the serpent on one's brow was to claim both wisdom and divine legitimacy. Travel east to India, and you find the Nagas, serpent beings who live in hidden realms beneath rivers and lakes. Sometimes benevolent, sometimes dangerous, they are depicted as guardians of treasure and keepers of secret wisdom. Their stories stretch across centuries of Hindu and Buddhist tradition, weaving serpents into the very structure of spiritual imagination. In Mesoamerica, Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, was a culture bringer, a god of learning, of maize, of calendars and knowledge. To the Maya and the Aztec, this being was not a monster, but a teacher, descending from the skies to share the gifts of civilization. Here, the serpent was not chaos, but enlightenment. In China, the dragon embodies a different dimension of the serpent archetype. Long and scaled, serpentine rather than winged, the dragon is wise, noble, and intimately tied to water, rain, and fertility. Unlike Western dragons, Chinese dragons are not usually enemies to be slain, but benefactors, bringers of prosperity and balance. Across the Pacific, in Aboriginal Australian traditions, we meet the rainbow serpent, a great creator being. It shapes rivers and landscapes, governs cycles of rain, fertility, and renewal. Here again, the serpent is a force not merely of danger, but of power, creation, and cosmic significance. Even in biblical tradition, the serpent appears at the very dawn of human myth, the one who speaks, who tempts, who offers knowledge. Though demonized in later readings, the serpent in Eden remains curious for its intelligence. It does not roar or strike, it reasons, it talks. Why does this archetype appear everywhere? Why do cultures separated by oceans, millennia, and languages converge on the image of the serpent as ruler, as teacher, as enemy, as god? One explanation is simple. Serpents are universal. They exist in every environment where humans have lived. Their movement is alien, their scales shimmer, their venom can kill. It is natural that humans would notice them, fear them, and weave them into story. Yet this alone does not explain the intelligence ascribed to them, the consistent pairing of serpents with wisdom, knowledge, and power. Another explanation drifts into the speculative. Perhaps these myths are cultural fossils, faint echoes of something far older than humanity itself. If reptilian beings, whether intelligent dinosaurs or another lineage, once existed, might their memory have survived, not in bones, but in archetypes? Oral tradition, after all, can carry stories across astonishing spans of time. Aboriginal tales describing coastlines that are now underwater have been shown to preserve memories more than 10,000 years old. If such continuity is possible, then could deeper myths preserve shadows of encounters long erased from the physical world? Imagine this. An early human ancestor encounters ruins, fossilized shapes, or even a living remnant of a reptilian lineage. Lacking context, they interpret it through story. That story is retold, reshaped, mythologized, until it becomes the tale of serpent gods, scaled kings, or underworld guardians. Over time, the literal is lost, but the imagery remains, like a watermark carried forward across cultures. The universality of these myths suggests that serpents touch something deep in the human psyche. Carl Jung might have called it an archetype, an image born of shared unconscious patterns. But even if we frame it that way, we are left with the question, why the serpent specifically? Why not the bear, the eagle, the horse? Why not other animals equally common in human lives? Perhaps because serpents feel older than us, older even than mammals. They are creatures of silence, of ancient design, slithering through deep time largely unchanged. To look at a snake today is to look at a body plan that has endured for over 100 million years. And so, the serpent becomes a perfect vessel for memory, whether psychological, symbolic, or perhaps, just perhaps, historical. Let yourself imagine for a moment that myths are not inventions but inheritances, that somewhere in our distant past, long before written language, humans carried stories given to them not by imagination but by encounter. Stories of beings older than us, scaled, intelligent, powerful, erased by catastrophe but remembered in whispers. If that were true, then the serpent gods of Sumer, the feathered serpent of Mexico, the Nagas of India, the dragons of China, and the rainbow serpent of Australia are not independent creations. They are fragments of a shared memory, scattered across continents like shards of a broken mirror. Even if this is not literally true, the thought itself has weight. It reminds us that myth and science are not opposites, but partners. One preserves memory in story, the other in stone. Both are incomplete, both are fragile, and in the gaps between them, wonder blooms. The reptilian legacy in myth does not prove that intelligent dinosaurs once ruled the earth, but it does raise a haunting possibility that we carry in our oldest stories the last surviving echoes of lives erased from the physical record. If so, then the serpent is not just a symbol, it is a memory. And that leads us deeper into the ocean of possibilities, into the realm of other minds, not reptilian this time, but soft-bodied, tentacled, and ancient beings who may have written their civilizations in water rather than stone. If land was once ruled by scaled giants, then the oceans far older, far wider, far more enduring have always been kingdoms of their own. And among their rulers, few are as mysterious, as quietly astonishing as the cephalopods, the octopuses, squids, and cuttlefish that drift through currents with alien grace. Today, when we think of intelligence, we often look for reflections of ourselves, tools, language, fire, cities. Yet intelligence can wear many faces, and perhaps none is stranger than that of an octopus. It is a being without bones, its body soft and fluid, yet its mind astonishingly complex. An octopus can solve puzzles, escape from jars, navigate mazes. It can remember solutions, recognize individual humans, and even display what seems like curiosity and play. Its nervous system is unlike ours. Instead of a single brain, much of its intelligence is distributed throughout its arms. Each arm can act semi-independently, tasting, touching, exploring the world with a kind of delegated awareness. Imagine, for a moment, if part of your own mind lived in your hands, making decisions before you even thought to act. This is how an octopus moves through the sea, a symphony of partial minds working together as one. Squids, too, show remarkable capacities. Some species hunt cooperatively, flashing signals through bioluminescence, communicating with colors that shimmer across their skin. Cuttlefish can camouflage in an instant, shifting not only shade but texture, imitating coral, sand, even other animals. Their skin is not just a covering, it is a living canvas, a language painted in light. And then there are their ancestors. Long before dinosaurs thundered on land, the oceans were filled with armored cephalopods. Ammonites, with their coiled shells, and belemnites, sleek like darts, dominated the seas for hundreds of millions of years. They thrived from the Devonian through the Cretaceous, surviving upheavals that wiped out countless other species. Their fossils are scattered across cliffs and deserts today, spirals of stone that hint at an age when tentacled minds ruled the water. Think about the timescales here. Ammonites endured for over 300 million years. Squids and octopuses trace their lineage even deeper. By contrast, humanity's entire history fits into a fraction of that span. If intelligence is an experiment that evolution runs again and again, why should we assume it only succeeded once? Now let your imagination drift. What if, in the silence of the deep oceans, cephalopod minds reached levels of complexity we can scarcely imagine? What if millions of years before us, they formed societies not of stone but of shifting coral, kelp forests, or bioluminescent displays? We look for ruins on land, but perhaps the ruins of ocean civilizations dissolve too quickly, swallowed by currents, consumed by salt and sand. Perhaps they wrote their histories in colors across their skin, stories told in light that vanished as soon as they were spoken. One could argue that the ocean itself erases. Salt water dissolves, pressure crushes, tectonics recycles seabeds. If an intelligent aquatic species had ever built tools, cities, or even structures of organic material, they would not last millions of years. Coral reefs built by other creatures dissolve and regrow within mere thousands. Shipwrecks vanish into rust within centuries. The ocean forgets quickly. And yet, consider how alien their intelligence already is to us. An octopus lives only a few years, and in that short span, it learns, adapts, creates. If it lived longer, if its generations stretched across centuries, what might it achieve? Some species of squid live communally in vast schools numbering in the thousands. Communication flows through them in waves of color and pattern. Could such schools have once formed the basis of cultures, of cooperative knowledge, of something akin to civilization? We must remember, civilization, as we define it, is deeply human. It is stone and fire, writing and cities. But what if civilization could be something else? A web of signals passed through light, a culture preserved not in monuments but in behavior, an inheritance written not in architecture but in instinct and display. Would we even recognize it as civilization, or would it pass through our notice, invisible, because it leaves behind no ruins we can measure? Perhaps myths again provide shadows. Many cultures speak of sea gods, oceanic kingdoms, beings half human, half fish or serpent. Poseidon with his trident, the Naga of rivers and lakes, merfolk in countless traditions, the Atlanteans of Plato's tale. These beings are imagined as intelligent, powerful, dwelling beneath waves in realms we cannot enter. Is this purely human invention, born of fear and fascination with the sea? Or is it possible that these myths are fragments of memory, echoes of a time when intelligence truly did dwell in the deep? It is important to pause here, to balance speculation with humility. We have no direct evidence that cephalopods ever formed civilizations. What we have are hints, their astonishing intelligence, their ancient lineage, their enduring presence through catastrophic ages. What we have is the possibility that intelligence has worn other faces, and that those faces may have looked out from the oceans long before us. Even now, as we study octopuses, we are reminded of how different they are. Some scientists call them the closest thing to aliens we can study on Earth. Their minds evolved entirely separately from ours. Mammals and cephalopods diverged more than 500 million years ago, and yet both paths arrived at intelligence. If it happened twice on this planet, why not more? Why not deeper, earlier, stranger? Picture an ancient ocean 200 million years ago. The continents are clustered differently. The seas are filled with ammonites and giant squid-like creatures. Somewhere in the shadows, perhaps, a mind is working, solving, planning, creating. It does not build pyramids or temples. It builds patterns in schools, collaborations in reefs, knowledge passed from one generation to the next in ways we cannot now recover. Then catastrophe comes, a meteor strike, anoxic waters, a mass extinction, the lineages vanish, the records dissolve. Only the fossils of shells remain, spirals in stone with no whisper of the minds that once inhabited them. This is the erasure of oceanic history, deeper even than the erasure on land, for the ocean covers and consumes, leaving behind only silence. And so we are left with questions. Could there have been civilizations in the seas, lost forever to salt and time? If so, what might they have been like? And what does it mean for us, knowing that intelligence may not belong to us alone, but may be a recurring song the earth has sung many times before? When we speak of forgotten worlds, our minds often turn to deserts, ruins, and buried cities. But the greatest realm of mystery is not on land at all. It is beneath the waves. More than 70% of our planet is covered by ocean, and most of it remains unexplored. Even with submarines, sonar, and satellites, we have only skimmed the surface. The deep sea is still a frontier as vast and unknowable as outer space. Consider this. We have mapped the surfaces of Mars and the Moon with more clarity than we have mapped the floor of our own oceans. Entire mountain ranges, trenches, and ridges lie hidden beneath miles of water. There are regions we have never seen, ecosystems we have only just discovered, and perhaps histories we do not yet recognize. If an ancient civilization arose in the seas, how would we know? Land-based societies leave ruins that crumble slowly into dust, but the ocean is less forgiving. Salt water corrodes metal, wood swells and disintegrates, stone becomes encrusted with coral and algae until it is unrecognizable. Structures collapse beneath the pressure of the depths, swallowed by sediments or buried under shifting seabeds. After millions of years, little would remain. And yet, the imagination is drawn again and again to the sea. Myths of lost civilizations beneath the waves appear across the globe. The most famous, of course, is Atlantis, first described by Plato as a mighty island empire that fell into the sea in a single day and night of misfortune. For centuries, the story has inspired explorers and dreamers. Was Atlantis a real place, a memory of a sunken island, or only a metaphor dressed as history? The answer remains uncertain, but the image endures. A city drowned, its towers now reefs, its streets walked only by fish. Beyond Atlantis, there are other names whispered in myth. Lemuria, said to have once bridged the Indian Ocean, linking Madagascar, India, and perhaps even Australia. In Polynesian lore, there are tales of Hawaii, a homeland across the waters, sometimes imagined as sunken. In Japanese folklore, the Dragon King's palace lies beneath the waves, a realm of beauty and treasure hidden in the deep. And in Celtic legend, the land of Lyonesse, once lying between Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly, is said to have sunk beneath the sea, leaving only a handful of survivors. These stories may be allegories, or they may be echoes of real events. Throughout human history, rising seas have swallowed coastlines. At the end of the last ice age, melting glaciers raised ocean levels by more than 100 meters. Vast stretches of habitable land disappeared. Doggerland, a region that once connected Britain to mainland Europe, is now beneath the North Sea. Off the coast of India, structures resembling ancient cities lie submerged near Dwarka. In the Black Sea, researchers have found evidence of sudden flooding thousands of years ago. The ocean is not static, it is a restless keeper of secrets. But myths of ocean civilizations may go deeper still, back beyond human memory. What if they are fragments of an older story, the memory of non-human intelligences that once thrived beneath the waves? Imagine a civilization of cephalopod minds, as we spoke of before, whose culture was woven into coral reefs, kelp forests, and bioluminescent displays. Imagine them flourishing for millions of years, far longer than we have, before vanishing in a catastrophe or slow decline. The seas, in their endless movement, would erase all but whispers, and perhaps those whispers drifted into our own storytelling, inherited unconsciously by the humans who came after. Think of the symmetry. On land, we find myths of serpent gods, scaled rulers, reptilian teachers. In the ocean, we find myths of sea gods, merfolk, drowned kingdoms, beings who live in realms we cannot reach. Across cultures, across continents, humanity has filled the unknown depths with stories of intelligence, wisdom, and danger. What if those stories are not only projections of our fears, but shadows of older truths? Even today, the ocean humbles us with its strangeness. Hydrothermal vents deep on the seafloor support entire ecosystems powered not by sunlight, but by chemical reactions. Strange creatures glow in the dark, using bioluminescence to hunt, mate, or camouflage. Gigantic squids, once thought to be pure legend, are real though rarely seen. If such wonders exist now, how much more might have existed in the forgotten ages? And here we return to the silence of the fossil record. Shells survive, bones of fish survive. But soft-bodied creatures, the builders of coral-like structures, the architects of imagined undersea civilizations, do not. They dissolve, they vanish, they are erased. If an aquatic intelligence once ruled, the ocean itself has ensured its secrecy. Still, traces may linger in subtle ways. Chemical signatures in sediments, odd arrangements of stone that defy explanation. Stories told by ancient peoples about drowned lands and undersea rulers. None of these are proof, but together they create an atmosphere of possibility. Let yourself imagine, as you listen, picture standing on the shore at dusk, waves rolling in, the horizon fading into darkness. Beneath those waters lies not emptiness, but history, a library written in currents and tides. Civilizations may have walked there, swum there, ruled there, long before our time. They left no monuments we can see, but they may have left their presence in the deep architecture of myth, in the global persistence of stories about kingdoms beneath the sea. If Earth has been ruled by many, why not by those who lived where we cannot follow? Why not by those whose homes dissolve as quickly as they are made, whose civilizations vanish not in stone but in salt? The ocean keeps its secrets well, perhaps too well. In 2018, two scientists, Gavin Schmidt, a climate researcher at NASA, and Adam Frank, an astrophysicist at the University of Rochester, posed a question that felt almost like science fiction, but was delivered with the rigor of science. If there had been an industrial civilization on Earth millions of years ago, would we be able to detect it today? They called it the Silurian hypothesis, borrowing the name from a British science fiction series in which an ancient race of reptilian beings, hidden deep beneath the Earth, were imagined as the true first rulers of the planet. The choice of name was playful, but the question itself was deeply serious. It was not about dinosaurs piloting spacecraft or octopuses building undersea temples. It was about geology, chemistry, and time. The scientists began from a simple observation. Our own civilization has transformed the planet in measurable ways. We burn fossil fuels, releasing carbon into the atmosphere. We mine rare elements, spreading them far from their natural deposits. We create plastics that do not degrade easily, microbeads and fragments that are now found in soils, rivers, and seas across the world. If humanity were to vanish tomorrow, traces of our presence would linger. Not forever, but for a while. The question is, how long? If another civilization had come and gone millions of years ago, could we detect similar traces of their presence? And more troubling still, are some of the anomalies we already see in the geological record actually the fingerprints of such a civilization misread as natural phenomena? The researchers pointed out that most of what we build, even the most enduring monuments, would not survive more than a few million years. Cities would crumble, steel would rust, concrete would fracture, skyscrapers, highways, dams, satellites, all would vanish. The planet would recycle the surface, erasing the evidence, but not everything would be lost. Some things might linger, embedded in the geological record. One of those signals would be isotopic anomalies. When we burn fossil fuels, we change the balance of carbon isotopes in the atmosphere and in sediments. The ratio of carbon-12 to carbon-13 shifts in a way that is detectable. Already, geologists can see this signature accumulating in modern rocks and ice cores. Millions of years from now, long after our cities are dust, those isotope ratios will remain as a subtle but undeniable marker that something unusual once happened. Another signal is the sudden release of stored carbon. Our burning of fossil fuels is injecting massive amounts of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere in a geological instant. Events like this have happened before the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum, about 56 million years ago, saw a rapid rise in temperature and carbon levels, leading to mass extinctions. But whether that was purely natural or triggered by some unknown factor remains debated. Could such spikes in the past represent the activity of civilizations, not just volcanic activity or methane release? It is a haunting possibility. Plastics, too, might leave a legacy. Though fragile on the surface, microplastics are now deeply embedded in sediments worldwide. Over millions of years, they may degrade into chemical residues, strange polymers that do not occur naturally, preserved as chemical ghosts in the rock. If another species studied Earth far in the future, they might find layers of plastic residue and wonder what force or intelligence created them. There is also the distribution of metals. We mine and refine vast amounts of aluminum, rare earth elements, and radioactive materials, scattering them across the globe in concentrations nature rarely produces. Buried deep in future rocks, these anomalies could stand out as signs of something deliberate, something industrial. But here lies the paradox. The further back we look, the harder it becomes to interpret. Natural processes can mimic artificial ones. Volcanoes can shift carbon ratios. Meteor impacts can scatter metals. Organic decay can produce chemical residues that look strange but are entirely natural. Distinguishing between a civilization's fingerprints and Earth's own chaotic handwriting may be impossible. Schmidt and Frank argued that if we found such signals on another planet, say, Mars or an exoplanet orbiting a distant star, we might be more open to considering them as evidence of intelligence. But on Earth we assume the opposite. We assume anomalies are natural until proven otherwise. Which means that if there was a civilization before us, we might already have overlooked its signs. Pause for a moment and let that sink in. We may already have the evidence. We may already hold the rocks, the cores, the samples. But our interpretation may blind us, framing every oddity as geology when some might be archaeology on a planetary scale. Think of the questions this raises. Could the strange carbon spikes in ancient sediments be the remnants of a civilization's industrial age? Could odd layers in the rocks, unusual metals, isotopes, or chemical compounds be misread as volcanic when they were actually technological? Could civilizations have come and gone, leaving only these faint chemical shadows, erased in all other ways by the planet's cycles? It humbles us because it forces us to reconsider our own footprint. We believe ourselves to be permanent, our monuments eternal. Yet if the Silurian hypothesis is correct, then even the most advanced industrial civilization may be reduced, in just a few million years, to nothing more than an isotopic anomaly, a chemical whisper, a thin, strange line in the rocks, and that realization opens the door to wonder. Because if we accept that we might vanish without a trace, then we must also accept that others before us might have done the same. The absence of ruins does not prove the absence of rulers. The silence of stone is not proof of emptiness. Let yourself imagine walking through a canyon, running your hand across ancient strata. Each line is a chapter of Earth's story. Somewhere among them, perhaps, is a forgotten page, a thin layer of carbon, a faint chemical scar. To us, it looks like nature. But what if, once, it was the record of a civilization that burned too brightly, too quickly, and vanished? If Earth does keep faint records of forgotten ages, then surely those records lie in the rocks in the layered pages of mountains, cliffs, and seabeds. Each stratum a sentence in the planet's long and complicated book. But rocks, like stories, can be interpreted in many ways. The same passage might be read as natural by one geologist and as anomalous by another. And sometimes, within those layers, we encounter things that don't quite fit. Consider the Great Oxidation Event more than 2 billion years ago. Before this turning point, Earth's atmosphere was largely devoid of oxygen. Then, suddenly, in geological terms, oxygen appeared in abundance, reshaping life forever. We attribute this to cyanobacteria, tiny organisms that learned to harness sunlight and release oxygen as waste. But the record is murky. The chemical signals are abrupt, unusual, and devastating to the life that had thrived before. Or take the carbon isotope anomalies scattered through Earth's timeline. At several points, the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum, the Permian extinction, the Triassic-Jurassic boundary, we find sudden shifts in carbon ratios, spikes that suggest massive releases of stored carbon. We explain them with volcanism, methane hydrates, asteroid impacts. But what if one or more of these spikes were not natural disasters at all, but the geological aftershock of industrial activity? If our own burning of fossil fuels creates a similar signature, why couldn't such a signal exist from another age? Then there are the so-called out-of-place fossils. In Illinois, coal seams have yielded iron concretions shaped uncannily like nails. In Russia, a discovery of aluminum gears embedded in ancient rock sparked debate, though many scientists explained it away as a natural crystal formation. In Canada, tiny metallic spheres with grooves have been reported in Precambrian layers more than 2 billion years old. Are these misunderstood natural phenomena? Almost certainly. And yet, the human imagination cannot help but wonder, what if they are the faintest traces of something else? We should remember that Earth itself conspires to mislead us. Pressure, heat, and time transform artifacts into curiosities, erasing sharp edges, blurring once clear forms into ambiguous shapes. What might have been a crafted object could, over millions of years, become indistinguishable from a mineral deposit. A foundation of stone could become a mere outcrop. A mine could collapse into a cavern. Technology, once erased of its context, begins to look like geology. Some anomalies resist easy explanation. In South Africa, strange metallic spheres with balanced grooves have been found in mineral deposits 3 billion years old. Some say they are natural formations of pyrophyllite. Others wonder how nature could produce such symmetry. In France, a block of coal was reported in the 19th century to contain an iron cube. In Oklahoma, a supposed hammer was found encased in rock. Most of these have conventional explanations. Yet each lingers in the imagination because they suggest a possibility that we are misreading signs as natural when they might be cultural, technological, intentional. Think about how archaeologists once misinterpreted early stone tools as simple rocks. For centuries, chipped flints were dismissed as accidents until someone recognized the repeating patterns of human design. How many patterns in ancient geology might we still be misreading today, assuming them to be accidents of nature because we do not expect to find intelligence in those layers? There is also the question of fossils that suggest more than they should. Take hallucigenia, an ancient Cambrian creature with spines and legs arranged so oddly that scientists initially reconstructed it upside down. The fossil record is full of mysteries like this, organisms so strange they blur the line between natural history and alien invention. While they are surely natural, their very strangeness reminds us how limited our expectations are. If we found a fossil of a truly non-human tool or artifact, would we even recognize it, or would we assume it to be another odd, natural form? Perhaps the most unsettling idea is this, that the signs of non-human technology are already here, catalogued in geological reports, photographed, stored in museum drawers, but classified as anomalous minerals or unusual fossils. We may already possess the evidence, hidden in plain sight, but without the framework to interpret it correctly. Just as early geologists once dismissed fossils of trilobites as stone beetles or curiosities of mineral growth, so too might we dismiss the faint remains of a forgotten intelligence. Let your mind drift across the stone walls of a canyon. Each layer represents millions of years, compressed into colors and lines. Somewhere in those layers could be a signal, a chemical fingerprint, a strange fossil, a pattern too deliberate to be random. But unless we are looking for it, unless we are willing to entertain the possibility, we may pass it by without notice. The challenge is not only finding signs in the rocks, but learning to ask the right questions. Our assumptions blind us. We expect civilization to look like us, to leave skyscrapers, tools, machines. But what if it looked different? What if it left signs we do not yet know how to read? A biotechnology that decays like flesh, a culture written only in light or sound. A civilization that thrived in forms we would mistake for coral reefs, for mineral deposits, for patterns in stone. And this is where science and wonder meet. Science tells us that most traces vanish after a few million years. Wonder asks us to imagine what those faint traces might mean. Between them lies mystery, the possibility that the rocks beneath our feet hold stories we have not yet learned how to read. So as you walk across the earth, pause sometimes to look at the stones. They are not silent, they are not simple. They are pages of a book so vast that even now, after centuries of study, we have read only fragments. Somewhere within them may be the faint signals of others who came before us, their technologies folded into geology, their stories hidden as natural until we learn how to see them differently. If stones can whisper faintly of forgotten ages, then myths shout across time with a persistence that borders on the uncanny. For while geology erases, human memory clings. Across cultures, continents, and centuries, we find stories of beings who came before us, rulers, teachers, gods not quite human, yet deeply involved in the shaping of our world. In the fertile valleys of Mesopotamia, the oldest written tablets tell us of the Anunnaki. These were not merely deities, but a pantheon of beings who descended from the heavens to order the world. In some versions, they bestowed the arts of agriculture, writing, and kingship. The word itself can be translated as princely offspring or those of royal blood. To the Sumerians, these beings were not abstract forces but tangible presences, non-human intelligences woven into the very fabric of civilization's dawn. Travel westward, and in the sands of Egypt, you encounter another striking theme: Zep Tepi, the first time. This was a golden age when gods walked among mortals. Inscriptions describe how deities like Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom, and Osiris, the lord of life and rebirth, ruled Egypt before the line of human pharaohs began. They did not merely watch from afar, they taught humans how to build, how to cultivate, how to govern. The Great Pyramids, though built much later, are sometimes seen as echoes of this earlier, divine age monuments pointing back to a time when rulers were more than human. Cross the ocean, and in Mesoamerica, you meet Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent. Unlike the fearsome serpent gods of chaos, Quetzalcoatl was a bringer of civilization credited with teaching humanity agriculture, astronomy, calendars, even morality. To the Maya and the Aztec, he was not a destroyer but a benefactor, descending to guide humanity into order. His image, scaled yet feathered, serpent yet divine, bridges sky and earth, chaos and wisdom. Notice the pattern here. In each of these traditions, Sumerian, Egyptian, Mesoamerican, the first rulers are not ordinary humans. They are beings of power, wisdom, and strangeness, intimately tied to the idea of knowledge itself. They do not merely reign, they instruct. They are remembered less as tyrants than as teachers. Why this recurring motif? Why, across cultures with no direct contact, do we find echoes of the same story? That before us, there were others, greater and wiser, who showed us the way. One answer is symbolic. Myths encode the awe of early humans encountering the forces of nature. The river that nourishes crops becomes a god of fertility. The cycles of the sun and moon become stories of birth, death, and rebirth. The serpent, with its hypnotic movement and deadly bite, becomes an emblem of hidden wisdom. In this view, the Anunnaki, Zeb-Tepi, and Quetzalcoatl are metaphors, not memories, ways of translating the overwhelming into the comprehensible. But another interpretation lingers, one that brushes the edge of speculation. What if these myths are not mere invention? What if they are cultural fossils, preserving some fragment of encounters long forgotten by geology but remembered in story? If non-human intelligences once walked the earth, whether reptilian, cephalopod, or something stranger, could their influence have survived not in ruins, but in tales of divine rulers? It is tempting to dismiss this as coincidence, as humanity's natural tendency to populate the unknown with gods and teachers. And yet, the convergence is striking. Ancient Mesopotamians, Egyptians, and Mesoamericans had no contact across oceans, no shared tradition, yet all told of non-human beings who taught humanity the arts of civilization. Could this convergence reflect a shared inheritance not just from imagination, but from memory? Think of how oral traditions can preserve truths across immense spans of time. Aboriginal stories in Australia describe coastlines that are now submerged, memories at least 10,000 years old. If such fidelity is possible across thousands of years, might fragments survive across tens or even hundreds of thousands? Not in detail, perhaps, but in archetypes, in echoes, in the enduring motif of the first rulers. It is here that myth becomes less a story and more a mirror, showing us possibilities that science has not yet confirmed but cannot entirely dismiss. Because whether the Anunnaki were deities, the gods of Zeb-Tepi were symbolic, or Quetzalcoatl was purely a mythological construct, the question remains: why do we so persistently imagine that before us there were others? Imagine yourself standing in an ancient temple, carvings surrounding you, figures with wings, serpent bodies, animal heads, and human hands. To the people who carved them, these beings were real, present, powerful, shaping their lives. Are we seeing mere symbols of nature? Or are we glimpsing a faint echo of encounters humanity can no longer consciously recall? This does not mean we should leap to conclusions. Myths are not proof. They are not geology. They are not artifacts in the strict scientific sense. But they are evidence of another kind. Evidence of how the human mind preserves and transmits meaning across generations. If civilizations before us existed, myths might be the last surviving vessel of their presence. Not accurate, not literal, but refracted through memory, imagination, and time. And even if they are only stories, they serve another purpose. They remind us that humanity has never seen itself as the first, the only, or the final. We have always imagined predecessors, guides, rulers who came before. Perhaps this instinct is born of humility, or perhaps it is born of memory. Either way, it whispers to us, we may not be alone in Earth's long history. If myths of first rulers invite us to wonder who may have walked before us, then their patterns across cultures deepen the mystery. For it is not merely that one civilization imagined serpent gods or sky beings, but that many did, scattered across the world, separated by vast oceans and unshared histories. The same archetypes appear again and again, as though humanity were remembering something it cannot fully recall, like fragments of a dream that repeat in every sleeper's mind. In Sumer, the Anunnaki descended from the heavens, ordering the world and teaching humankind how to live. In Egypt, Zeb-Tepi was the first time, when gods ruled as kings, their falcon heads and serpent crowns binding sky and earth together. In Mesoamerica, the feathered serpent Quetzalcoatl was both bird and snake, bridging heaven and soil, carrying knowledge down to humankind. Yet these motifs are not confined to the great river valleys or monumental empires. In India, the Nagas, half human, half serpent, lived beneath rivers and lakes, guarding wisdom and treasure, straddling the line between the underworld and the human realm. In China, the dragon was not a monster but the very emblem of kingship. The emperor's throne was the dragon throne. The ruler himself was the living dragon, the serpent of the sky. In Australia, the rainbow serpent carved rivers and landscapes, bringing both creation and law. And in the Andes, the god Viracocha rose from the waters of Lake Titicaca, a sky being who made the sun, the moon, and civilization itself. It is difficult to dismiss the convergence. How could so many cultures, with no contact across oceans or deserts, invent similar rulers, serpent beings, sky beings, hybrid kings who came not only to reign but to teach? The most cautious explanation is psychological. Carl Jung spoke of archetypes, recurring figures that arise from the shared architecture of the human mind. The serpent is primal, a shape that commands fear and fascination. The sky is universal, inspiring awe and transcendence. Together they form a natural symbol of otherness, of power beyond the human. Perhaps these kings of sky and serpent emerge not from history, but from the deep unconscious shared by all humanity. And yet, what if archetypes are not just inventions of the mind? What if they are memories, blurred by time, mythologized through retelling, but rooted in something once real? If non-human intelligences ever walked the earth, their influence might echo not in bones or stones, but in stories. Their features scaled, radiant, hybrid could have been remembered in archetype form. Their actions teaching, ruling, guiding could have been transformed into myths of divine kingship. Imagine early humans encountering beings unlike themselves. To those ancestors, such figures would have been gods, not strangers. Their wisdom, incomprehensible at first, would have been received as law, ritual, culture. Over generations, the details would blur, but the impression would remain: rulers from the sky, kings in serpent form, teachers whose origins lay beyond ordinary humanity. This raises an unsettling possibility. When we read the myths of Anunnaki, Zeb Tepi, Quetzalcoatl, dragons, nagas, rainbow serpents, are we hearing echoes of a shared psychology, or are we overhearing whispers of a shared history? Consider how oral traditions preserve truths across astonishing spans of time. Aboriginal Australian stories recall coastlines that vanished 10,000 years ago beneath rising seas. Polynesian navigation charts encode star maps accurate across thousands of miles of ocean. If myth can carry memory across millennia, could it not also carry faint impressions of encounters far older? Not with precise detail, but with recurring motifs: serpents, sky beings, hybrid rulers. Even if they are only symbols, they are strangely consistent ones. Serpent kings and sky rulers represent duality, earth and heaven, chaos and order, mortality and divinity. They embody humanity's sense of coming after, of inheriting a world already shaped by forces beyond itself. Perhaps this is why they endure, appearing again and again, even in places where no cultural exchange was possible. Pause and imagine for a moment. A forgotten age in which rulers not quite human walked the earth. Their reign ended long ago, erased from stone and fossil. Yet their image lived on, carried in the minds of early humans, retold around fires, woven into stories that crossed oceans and centuries. Now they appear to us as archetypes, as myths of serpent kings and sky gods, but perhaps once they were something more. Even if no such rulers ever existed, the persistence of these archetypes tells us something about ourselves. Humanity does not see itself as alone. We imagine predecessors, guides, beings who came before to shape our path. This instinct may be born of humility, or it may be the residue of memory. Either way, it suggests that the story of intelligence on Earth may be larger than our own chapter. If myths hint at rulers before us, then geology reminds us of the brutal truth. Whatever has lived upon this earth has faced the possibility of sudden and absolute erasure. Time is not gentle. It is punctuated by cataclysms, great resets when life is forced to begin again, its progress shattered, its diversity thinned, its rulers toppled in an instant. Perhaps the most famous of these events is the asteroid impact that ended the age of dinosaurs 66 million years ago. A rock barely 10 kilometers wide struck the Yucatan Peninsula with the force of billions of nuclear bombs. Forests ignited, oceans heaved, the sky darkened beneath a veil of ash, and for years the earth shivered under a cold, poisonous twilight. More than 70% of species vanished, including nearly all large dinosaurs. If there had been an intelligent lineage among them, thinkers, builders, rulers, they too would have perished, their cities turned to fire, their bones to ash, their history erased in the smoke of that single day. But the dinosaurs were not the only victims of catastrophe. The Earth's history is marked by 5 great mass extinctions and many smaller crises. The Permian extinction 252 million years ago was even more devastating than the one that killed the dinosaurs. It is sometimes called the Great Dying. Up to 90% of marine species and 70% of terrestrial vertebrates vanished. The cause may have been massive volcanic eruptions in Siberia, releasing carbon dioxide and methane on a scale beyond comprehension, turning oceans anoxic and skies toxic. If a civilization had arisen in the Permian, whether in the seas or on land, it would have been annihilated completely. The slate would have been scrubbed almost perfectly clean. Other events remind us of Earth's volatility. The Triassic-Jurassic extinction, which cleared the way for dinosaurs to dominate. The Ordovician extinction, when glaciation froze much of the planet. The Devonian extinction, a slow collapse of marine ecosystems. Each was a reset button, pressed by forces beyond the control of any creature. And it is not only impacts and volcanism. Supervolcanoes, such as Yellowstone or Toba, can unleash eruptions that darken skies for years, collapsing food chains. Around 74,000 years ago, the eruption of Toba in Indonesia may have nearly extinguished humanity itself, reducing our population to a few thousand survivors. Civilization as we know it was still tens of thousands of years away, but had it existed then, it too would have been erased. Even subtler catastrophes, shifts in climate, sudden ice ages, bursts of cosmic radiation can strip away entire lineages. Evolution has never guaranteed permanence. It experiments, it builds, it erases. Again and again, life is forced to start over, the survivors inheriting a changed Earth. Now, imagine intelligence caught in these cycles. A civilization rising slowly, perhaps not human, perhaps reptilian or cephalopod, thriving for a few million years. Then catastrophe strikes. An asteroid, a flood basalt eruption, a sudden freeze. In days or decades their world collapses. Their food disappears, their habitats crumble, their populations dwindle to nothing. And unlike us, they leave no lasting monuments of steel or stone. Within a million years, all trace is gone, their reign reduced to a silence in the rocks. We often assume intelligence must lead to survival, that our technology shields us, but history suggests otherwise. Catastrophe is impartial. It does not care for cleverness. Dinosaurs were mighty, ammonites abundant, trilobites prolific, yet all are gone. If they too had achieved intelligence, it would not have saved them from fire, ice, or flood. And so we are left with a sobering thought. Civilizations may not end in gradual decline, but in sudden annihilation. Reset after reset, Earth clears the board. What remains is chance. What survives is only what fits the new world. If non-human intelligences once walked here, their end may not have been a slow fade into obscurity, but a violent erasure in a moment of planetary upheaval. Yet these catastrophes are not only endings, they are also beginnings. The asteroid that killed the dinosaurs opened the way for mammals to flourish, for primates to evolve, for humans to eventually appear. The Permian extinction cleared ecological space for the ancestors of dinosaurs and ultimately birds. Every reset is also a renewal. Each silence is followed by a new song. This rhythm, cataclysm and reset, collapse and renewal is the deep heartbeat of Earth's history. To see it clearly is to realize how fragile we are. Our civilization, vast as it feels, is young and precarious. If another asteroid were to strike, if another supervolcano were to erupt, if another mass extinction were to unfold, how much of us would remain? Perhaps only a thin layer in the rocks, a chemical scar, a silence misread as nature. And so, when we hear myths of lost civilizations or dream of rulers erased, we are not only imagining others, we are imagining ourselves. We are recognizing, perhaps unconsciously, that what has happened before may happen again. That the earth is not ours alone, nor will it be forever. That intelligence may rise many times, and each time be humbled, erased, forgotten. If cataclysm is the great eraser, then survival is the exception and perhaps the seed of myth. For even when extinction strikes, it rarely claims all. Some species endure, some individuals adapt. In the silence after catastrophe, a few survivors stumble into the new world, carrying fragments of the old one with them. Imagine, then, not only the destruction of a civilization, but the persistence of a handful of its members. Their cities burned, their kin lost, their knowledge fractured, and yet they endure. They wander into a new age, diminished but alive, meeting younger, simpler beings who look upon them with awe. To those who never knew the old world, these survivors would seem like gods. Across cultures, myths describe culture bringers who arrive after disaster. In Greek tradition, Prometheus gave fire to humanity, a gift that transformed survival into civilization. But Prometheus was also punished for his act, suggesting he carried knowledge that did not belong to humans, something stolen or preserved from an earlier time. In Egypt, Thoth, god of wisdom and writing, was said to have taught humanity the arts of language, mathematics, and astronomy. His presence appears in stories of renewal, as though he were not the originator but the restorer, bringing back knowledge that might otherwise have been lost. In Mesoamerica, Quetzalcoatl reappears as more than a ruler. He is a teacher who arrives after great upheaval. He bestows agriculture, calendars, laws, as if carrying forward the memory of an older world into a younger one. Even in Polynesian tradition, heroes like Maui fish up islands, slow the sun, and reshape the world. They are not mere mortals but liminal figures straddling the line between God and man, between survivor and teacher. And then there are the flood myths. In Mesopotamian legend, Utnapishtim survives a great deluge and becomes a source of wisdom for Gilgamesh. In the Hebrew Bible, Noah preserves life through the flood, carrying forward not just animals but memory itself. In both cases, survival is coupled with sacred duty. The survivor becomes the bearer of continuity, the bridge between worlds. What if these myths are not only allegories of resilience, but echoes of something deeper? What if, after a cataclysm that erased an earlier intelligence, a few survivors walked among our ancestors? To early humans, their knowledge of stars, of farming, of architecture would have seemed miraculous. Their endurance would have made them seem immortal. Their strangeness, whether in form or in wisdom, would have marked them as divine. Perhaps we mistake their survival for divinity. Perhaps the gods who teach, the heroes who restore, are the mythologized memory of beings who carried fragments of a lost civilization into the new one. Not omnipotent deities, but survivors. Not supernatural, but extraordinary. Think of how knowledge itself can outlive disaster. When Rome fell, much of its science and philosophy vanished in Europe, but fragments were carried forward, preserved in monasteries, translated in Islamic centers of learning, whispered into the Renaissance centuries later. Now magnify that pattern across geological time. Could survivors of an erased intelligence have carried fragments of their world into ours, leaving us myths instead of textbooks? And what of their appearance? Survivors of a non-human intelligence would not have looked like us. They might have been reptilian, cephalopodic, avian, or entirely alien to our form. To early humans, their bodies would have been shocking, unforgettable. And yet, through generations of retelling, their features might have softened into archetypes: serpent gods, bird-headed rulers, radiant sky beings. The raw memory transmuted into myth. Even today, myths often blur survival with divinity. The Hopi tell of Kachinas, spirit beings who live in the mountains and emerge to guide humans with sacred dances. The Dogon of Mali tell of Nomo, amphibious beings who descended from the sky to bring knowledge of the cosmos. The parallels are striking: figures who arrive after upheaval, bearing gifts of wisdom. If we look at these stories not as literal history but as cultural fossils, they suggest a haunting possibility that myths preserve the memory of survivors. Not whole civilizations but remnants, not permanent rulers but wandering teachers. And if this is so, then humanity's gods may not only be creations of imagination, but echoes of encounters with others who endured where their kind did not. Survivors mistaken for deities, their resilience transformed into legend, their teachings into divine commandments. This does not prove that non-human intelligences walked the earth, but it does remind us of the fragility of memory. Catastrophe erases, survival distorts, and what remains after fire and flood is story. So the myths of culture bringers may be more than allegory. They may be whispers of survival, fragments of older worlds handed down to us in the only form that could last: tale, archetype, song. And if that is true, then perhaps our own survivors, should we face extinction, will one day be remembered in the same way, not as people, but as gods. If myths preserve whispers of forgotten ages, then artifacts are their physical counterparts, objects we can hold, examine, measure. Most artifacts fit neatly into our timelines: stone tools chipped in recognizable patterns, pottery shards fired in ancient kilns, coins stamped with rulers' faces. They form the familiar backbone of archaeology. But then there are the others, the strange pieces that do not seem to belong, the objects found in layers too old, or made with techniques too advanced, or shaped in ways that defy explanation. These are known as out-of-place artifacts, or OO parts. Mainstream archaeology often dismisses them as misinterpretations, hoaxes, or accidents of geology. And indeed, many are just that. Yet the allure remains. Because some artifacts resist easy explanation, lingering in the imagination as possible fragments of forgotten civilizations or even intelligences before humanity itself. Take the crystal skulls, perhaps the most famous of all ooparts. Dozens have been discovered, carved from clear or milky quartz, some allegedly of great antiquity. The most famous, the Mitchell-Hedges skull, is claimed to have been found in Belize in the 1920s. Legends grew around it that it held mystical powers, that it was a relic of Atlantis, that it could reveal hidden histories. Scientific examination shows that many of the skulls were likely carved in the 19th century using modern tools. Yet the myth persists because the object itself is haunting. A human face sculpted in enduring crystal, gazing back at us with blank, translucent eyes. Then there are the Piri Reis maps, drawn in the 16th century by an Ottoman admiral. The surviving fragment appears to depict not only the coasts of Europe and Africa, but also parts of South America with surprising accuracy for its time. More controversially, some claim it shows Antarctica free of ice, a state it has not known for millions of years. Mainstream scholars argue these are imaginative reconstructions, sailors combining hearsay and guesswork. Yet the allure remains, a map that seems to carry knowledge too old for its paper. In South America, the Ica stones of Peru show carvings of humans interacting with dinosaurs, advanced surgeries, and strange technologies. Most are now considered modern forgeries. But again, the question lingers. Why would local farmers carve such images, and why did the idea take hold so strongly? Perhaps because it resonates with the suspicion that our history is incomplete. Other objects come from deeper in time. In Russia, metallic coils, some microscopic, have been reported in sediments tens of thousands of years old. In South Africa, smooth metallic spheres with grooves have been found in Precambrian rock over 2 billion years old. Natural explanations exist: crystallization, geological processes, artifacts of mining. But their symmetry and mystery keep them alive in speculative lore. And then there is the Antikythera mechanism, discovered in a Greek shipwreck in 1901. At first dismissed as a corroded lump of bronze, it was later revealed to be an intricate clockwork device, gears upon gears, predicting the movements of stars and planets. Built over 2,000 years ago, it is sometimes called the world's first computer. It is not an oupart in the sense of being impossibly old, but it reminds us that advanced knowledge can appear, vanish, and be forgotten for centuries, only to be rediscovered much later. This is the tension at the heart of ouparts, between mainstream rejection and speculative interpretation. Archaeologists caution us not to leap to conclusions. Strange artifacts may be hoaxes, errors, or natural formations. But for those drawn to wonder, they are glimpses of possibility. They suggest that human history may not be a straight line, that knowledge may be older, stranger, more cyclical than we assume. And beyond that, they raise the question, what if some artifacts are not human at all? Consider how easily our own objects might confuse future discoverers. A rusted gear, stripped of its context, might be mistaken for a crystal. A shard of plastic, compressed in stone, might look like a mineral. A broken phone screen might resemble obsidian. Without the cultural framework, even the most obvious artifacts become puzzles. Now, imagine encountering a tool not made by humans, but by another intelligence. Would we even recognize it? Or would we catalogue it as a curiosity, a geological anomaly, another oupart? This is where ouparts intersect with the deeper question of forgotten worlds. Because if civilizations rose before us, whether reptilian, cephalopod, or something stranger, their artifacts might not look like ours. They might be unrecognizable, dismissed as natural oddities. Or they might survive only as fragments, stripped of meaning, leaving us to wonder at spheres, gears, and carvings that do not fit our timeline. Skeptics remind us that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Believers remind us that absence of proof is not proof of absence. Between them lies mystery, a space where artifacts like the crystal skulls, the Piri Reis map, and the grooved spheres continue to live, not as proof, but as provocations. And perhaps that is their true purpose. They remind us to question the completeness of our story. They remind us that history, like geology, has gaps, erasures, silences. And they remind us that sometimes the most important truths are hidden in objects we do not yet know how to read. If artifacts tease us with anomalies, then entire monuments confront us with puzzles carved in stone. Around the world, megalithic sites stand as silent enigmas, immense blocks cut, transported, and fitted with a precision that seems almost impossible, even with our modern machines. They are testaments to human ingenuity, yes, but they also provoke a deeper question. Did we build them alone? Or did we inherit fragments of knowledge from a source older than ourselves? Consider the pyramids of Giza, rising from the Egyptian desert. For over 4,000 years, they have stood against wind and sand, aligned with uncanny accuracy to cardinal points and celestial markers. The Great Pyramid's base is nearly level to within fractions of an inch. Its sides slope at precise angles, its internal passages align with stars. We know the Egyptians were brilliant engineers, yet the scale and precision still inspire wonder. Was this purely human achievement, or was it guided by techniques remembered or inherited from an earlier age? In South America, the stonework of Cusco and Sacsayhuaman presents another puzzle. Blocks weighing many tons are fitted together with such perfection that a knife blade cannot pass between them. The stones are irregular in shape, yet interlock like pieces of a three-dimensional jigsaw, resisting earthquakes that toppled later constructions. The Incas themselves claimed these walls were the work of gods, remnants of a time before their own. Did they mean this symbolically, or were they repeating a memory of knowledge passed down from an older source? At Pumapunku in Bolivia, the mystery deepens. Here, at an altitude of over 12,000 feet, lie massive blocks carved with geometric precision. Straight edges, perfect right angles, intricate grooves. Some stones weigh over 100 tons, yet were transported and set in place with methods still debated. To look upon them is to feel the weight of forgotten technique, craftsmanship beyond expectation for a pre-industrial culture. Were these skills uniquely human, the flowering of local genius, or echoes of technologies long lost, perhaps even borrowed from beings who came before? Travel to the Pacific, and you find Nan Madol in Micronesia, a city built on coral reefs with massive basalt columns forming canals and platforms. Its origin is shrouded in mystery. Local legends speak of sorcerers who flew the stones into place, as if hinting at knowledge no longer available to us. And of course, there is Stonehenge, where monoliths align with solstices, their transport and arrangement a feat of collective effort. Or Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, a site over 11,000 years old, with carved pillars and animal reliefs predating agriculture itself. The discovery of Göbekli Tepe overturned our assumptions. Complex monumental building was possible long before the rise of cities, suggesting either a forgotten chapter of human capacity or the inheritance of knowledge from an older source. Skeptics remind us that all these marvels can be explained by human effort, ingenuity, and patience. Levers, ropes, sledges, communal labor, and indeed, there is truth in that. But for those who listen more closely, the precision feels like a whisper, a suggestion that the techniques were not invented in isolation, but remembered. That some knowledge flowed into human hands from an older intelligence, non-human in origin, its presence preserved not in ruins but in skills too advanced for their time. What might such lost technologies have looked like? They need not have been machines of metal or engines of fire. They might have been simpler, subtler techniques of geometry, methods of stone cutting, ways of aligning with the stars. Knowledge that could be taught without tools, passed down through story and ritual, preserved just long enough to shape monuments before being forgotten again. Consider how fragile knowledge truly island. When Rome collapsed, many engineering techniques vanished from Europe for centuries. Concrete, aqueducts, even the recipe for certain glass was lost, only to be rediscovered much later. If knowledge can vanish so easily in a few hundred years, how much more could be lost across millennia? And if fragments survive, they may seem miraculous to those who inherit them, attributed not to memory but to gods. This is where the idea of non-human rulers returns. If there were earlier intelligences, their influence may not remain in artifacts alone, but in skills transmitted, half understood, mythologized. A reptilian mind teaching stone cutting, a cephalopod sage passing on knowledge of celestial cycles, a survivor of catastrophe guiding humans to build in ways they themselves could not have devised. The teachers fade, the context is lost, but the skills remain, embodied in monuments that outlast their makers. It is important to stress, there is no proof of this. Archaeology stands on human achievement, and rightly so. But speculation allows us to ask, could the so-called lost technologies of ancient builders be hand-me-downs? Fragments of inheritance from civilizations erased by time? If so, then megaliths are not just monuments of stone, but monuments of memory, the last surviving testimony of rulers before us. And even if they are not, their presence teaches us something profound. They remind us that human ingenuity is capable of greatness, that we underestimate the past at our peril, that knowledge can leap forward, vanish, and be reborn. They remind us that civilizations are fragile, and that what seems permanent may one day be inexplicable. So when we walk among the megaliths, the pyramids, the terraces, the walls, the circles, we should not only marvel at what humans achieved, but also listen for the faint possibility that we were not alone in shaping them. That perhaps hidden behind their construction, there lingers the invisible hand of an intelligence older than ours, one that taught, then vanished, leaving only stone to remember. When we think of archaeology, we imagine discovery, the brush sweeping sand from a pot, the spade striking stone foundations, the joy of finding what was hidden. Yet behind every discovery is a far greater silence. For every artifact we recover, countless others are gone forever. For every city unearthed, thousands have crumbled into dust beyond recognition. Archaeology is not only the study of what remains, it is also the study of absence. Our species has walked this earth for around 300 years. Yet our most enduring records, writing, monuments, tools of metal span only the last few thousand. Before that, the record grows thin. Stone tools survive, yes, but fragile materials, wood, cloth, fiber, food vanish almost instantly. Even fire, one of humanity's oldest and most important technologies, leaves only faint traces, hard to recognize unless carefully preserved in ash and charcoal. Now imagine stretching this silence backward, not thousands of years but millions. What remains then? Fossilization is a rare event. Of all the creatures that have lived, only a tiny fraction left fossils behind. And fossils tell us bones and shells, not cities or machines. Civilizations with their fragile constructions are even less likely to fossilize. Think of our own world. If humanity were to disappear tomorrow, how long would our work survive? Within a few decades, buildings would decay, their steel rusting, their concrete cracking. Within centuries, vegetation would reclaim cities. Within millennia, most traces would be gone, buried beneath soil and sediment. Within 1,000,000 years, almost nothing would remain recognizable. Within 10 million, the surface of the Earth would have recycled itself, continents shifting, oceans subducting crust into the mantle. Our monuments, our skyscrapers, our machines, all erased. Even our most durable creations, plastics, nuclear waste, isotopic signatures would fade into subtle traces, detectable only with careful analysis. To a future intelligence, our entire civilization might appear only as a thin, anomalous layer in the rocks, a line of carbon, a scattering of metals, a chemical fingerprint, our story compressed into silence. If this is true for us, then it must be true for others. If non-human intelligences ever rose before humanity, their absence is exactly what we should expect. Their tools, their cities, their machines, all would be gone. Their very bodies would likely leave no fossils. Their histories would dissolve into the deep churn of geology. This is why absence is not proof of emptiness. The fossil record is full of gaps, and even for creatures we know were abundant, their traces are fleeting. Whole lineages appear suddenly, then vanish, with only a few fossilized representatives to show they ever lived. Archaeology of deep time is archaeology of incompleteness. It is the study of a book where most pages are missing, most lines erased, most words illegible. Consider, for example, the coelacanth, a fish thought to have gone extinct 66 million years ago, known only from fossils. Then, in 1938, a living specimen was found off the coast of South Africa, alive and well, its lineage quietly surviving in the deep. For decades, it had been absent from our record, and so we assumed it was gone. But absence was only silence, not extinction. Now imagine not a fish, but a civilization. Perhaps it too vanished from the record, not because it never existed, but because its traces were erased, buried, dissolved, transformed into forms we no longer recognize. This is what the archaeology of absence demands of us: humility. It reminds us that the earth is not generous in preserving history, that silence is not certainty, that what we see is only a fraction of what has been. Think again of megaliths like Göbekli Tepe. For thousands of years it lay buried, forgotten, until accident revealed it again. How many other sites remain hidden beneath soil and sea? How many have been lost forever, eroded or recycled by Earth's restless geology? The deeper we look into time, the more complete the erasure becomes, until we are left not with ruins but with nothing at all. And yet, perhaps that nothing is not truly empty. Perhaps it conceals stories we cannot yet read. The rocks hold anomalies, the myths hold fragments, the oceans hold mysteries. We call it absence, but perhaps it is presence in disguise, presence that we lack the tools or the imagination to recognize. So the archaeology of absence is not despair, it is invitation. It is the space where imagination meets science, where we ask, what could have been here? What might we be missing? What civilizations, what rulers, what intelligences might have risen and fallen, their traces erased not because they never lived, but because the earth forgets? To walk among ruins is to touch the past. To walk among silences is to touch the possibility of deeper pasts, lost entirely but for the faintest whispers. It is to stand before absence and recognize it as the most common record of all. If civilizations vanish so completely, erased by time and geology, then we must ask, what, if anything, would endure? What fragments of us might be legible to a future intelligence millions of years from now, when mountains have risen and fallen, when oceans have swallowed and released continents? What faint traces would still whisper, someone was here? The first and most obvious candidate is plastics. Our age is defined not only by digital technologies and skyscrapers, but by synthetic polymers that nature never produced on its own. Bottles, bags, containers, microbeads, they litter every corner of the planet, from the peaks of mountains to the trenches of the sea. Plastics resist decay in ways organic material cannot. Over centuries, they fragment into smaller and smaller pieces, but even as microplastics, they persist. Already they are buried in sediments, frozen in ice, carried in rivers, woven into soils. Give the earth 1,000,000 years, and the bottles and bags will be gone, but the residues may remain. Polymers can degrade into chemical compounds, leaving behind a fingerprint of molecules unlikely to form through natural processes. In future rocks, a geologist might find unusual clusters of carbon-based chemicals, strange polymers that tell of an industrial age long vanished. Another candidate is isotopes. By burning fossil fuels, we have shifted the balance of carbon isotopes in the atmosphere. Carbon-12, carbon-13, and carbon-14 occur in different ratios depending on whether the carbon comes from living plants, ancient coal, or petroleum. Our emissions are leaving a distinct signal, a sharp, rapid change in isotope ratios that will be visible in sediments and ice layers long after we are gone. Millions of years from now, this spike will remain as a thin line, a chemical scar in the rocks. To whoever studies it, it will say, something unusual happened here. We also scatter radioactive elements across the globe. Nuclear tests in the 20th century released isotopes never before seen on Earth, or not seen for billions of years. Plutonium-244, cesium-137, strontium-90. These will decay, yes, but traces may linger in deep sediments. Even when the isotopes are gone, their daughter products will remain, tiny signatures that reveal their presence. A civilization millions of years in the future might drill into the crust and find a sudden, unnatural spike of radioactivity, marking the time when another intelligence split the atom. Then there are sediment layers. Human activity reshapes the landscape at a scale rivaling natural forces. We redirect rivers, build dams, clear forests, strip mountains, dig mines. These changes alter erosion and deposition, creating layers of sediment that look different from those laid down before. Cities themselves, when they collapse, may form urban strata, crushed concrete, glass, and steel pressed into the earth, forming a strange geological horizon unlike any natural deposit. Consider also the global movement of elements. Aluminum, once rare in pure form, is now abundant as refined metal scattered everywhere. Rare earth elements, mined for electronics, have been redistributed far from their natural deposits. Copper wiring, steel beams, even tiny fragments of silicon chips, all of these may endure as microscopic traces in sediments, their concentrations anomalous compared to natural baselines. And finally, there is the possibility of fossilized technology, not machines intact, but remnants transformed by geological processes. A gear might dissolve, leaving only a cavity in stone. A circuit might oxidize, leaving only a stain of unusual minerals. Such traces would be ambiguous, easy to mistake for natural formations, and perhaps we already have mistaken them. Perhaps some anomalies catalogued as odd minerals, curious concretions, or inexplicable fossils are actually the faint remains of forgotten technologies, stripped of context by time. This brings us to the most haunting speculation. What if Earth's record already contains the traces of other intelligences, but we have misinterpreted them? What if some of the isotope anomalies, some of the carbon spikes, some of the unexplained mineral deposits are not natural at all, but cultural? What if the evidence of forgotten civilizations is already under our microscopes, but our frameworks blind us to their meaning? Imagine a geologist in some distant future, slicing into rock and finding a thin black line of carbon, a scatter of polymers, a faint spike of radioactivity. To them, it may look like a natural event, a volcanic outburst, a sudden warming, a chemical accident. Only with imagination would they ask, was this the mark of a civilization? And so it may be with us. We study the rocks and find anomalies. We explain them as volcanism, methane release, asteroid impact. Perhaps we are right, but perhaps, just perhaps, some of those anomalies are the faint afterimages of others who came before civilizations erased, leaving only chemical shadows in the stone. This possibility is not proof, it is humility. It reminds us that traces do not shout, they whisper, that absence is not emptiness, that what remains may not look like cities or tools, but like subtle distortions in the chemistry of rocks. And that to read them rightly, we must be willing to imagine that intelligence may have walked here before. So what would remain? Plastics, isotopes, odd sediment layers, fragile signals in the vastness of time. Enough to hint, perhaps, but never enough to prove. Enough to whisper, but never to sing. And maybe that is how the earth prefers it. To remember faintly, not fully. To carry the stories of her rulers as traces in stone, waiting for eyes willing to see. If Earth remembers faintly, then humanity's emergence feels like a shout against that silence. For, compared to the slow rhythm of evolution, our rise was astonishingly fast. In a geological blink, we went from scattered bands of hunter-gatherers to builders of monuments, painters of caves, planters of fields, and shapers of empires. It is a leap so sudden that even scientists call it the Great Leap Forward. For nearly 200,000 years, our ancestors lived in ways not so different from other animals. They hunted, gathered, roamed. Their tools were simple stones, chipped into sharp edges. They left behind little that suggested symbolic thought, no carvings, no paintings, no signs of abstract imagination. And then, Around 50,000 years ago, something changed. Suddenly, art appeared. In caves from France to Indonesia, walls bloomed with images of bison, lions, mammoths, handprints, and stars. In Blombos Cave in South Africa, pieces of ochre were carved with geometric designs. Tiny beads, pendants, and figurines appeared, the first evidence of humans shaping not only tools, but meaning. With art came ritual. Burials began to include grave goods, shells, pigments, ornaments, suggesting that humans were imagining not only life, but afterlife. Language, too, may have blossomed at this time, giving voice to thought, memory, and myth. And then, scarcely 10,000 years ago, another leap: agriculture. Humans shifted from foraging to farming, domesticating wheat, barley, rice, maize. Villages grew into towns, towns into cities. In places like Mesopotamia, Egypt, the Indus Valley, and China, writing appeared, along with calendars, temples, and laws. Most striking of all is Göbekli Tepe in modern-day Turkey. Over 11,000 years old, it predates agriculture, yet it is a monumental site of carved pillars, some weighing tons, arranged in circles and decorated with animals. It is as if symbolic thought and complex construction burst forth fully formed, long before humans had settled into farming. Archaeologists still debate how hunter-gatherers could have built such a site. The stones whisper of knowledge arriving earlier than expected. Why this sudden acceleration? Why did humanity leap so far, so fast, when for so long we lingered in simplicity? Evolution can explain gradual change, larger brains, better tools, but the flowering of symbolic thought, art, ritual, and agriculture in such a short span feels disproportionate. One possibility is that humans reached a critical threshold of population, cooperation, and communication, sparking cultural explosion. Another is that environmental changes forced innovation, nudging humans toward farming and settlement. Both explanations hold truth. Yet speculation allows us to ask another question: what if we did not leap alone? What if fragments of knowledge were passed to us, inherited from predecessors, now lost? Survivors of an earlier intelligence, wandering after cataclysm, may have taught our ancestors skills they could not have invented so quickly on their own. Myths of culture bringers, Prometheus with fire, Quetzalcoatl with maize, Thoth with writing, might preserve this memory. Even if distorted, the stories align. Someone, something, gave us the first sparks. Perhaps the leap was not a leap at all, but a hand extended, a gift of memory passed from a fading intelligence to a rising one. Enough to seed art, ritual, farming, building, enough to change the trajectory of humanity forever. Even without such speculation, the speed of our development is remarkable. In the span of a few millennia, we went from nomadic hunters to builders of Stonehenge, of pyramids, of cities aligned to stars. We harnessed metals, invented writing, mapped the heavens. Compare this to the millions of years during which dinosaurs ruled without leaving monuments, or the hundreds of millions when cephalopods thrived without cities. Our burst of creativity is unique in its rapidity. And so the question lingers: was it purely ours, or was it guided? Did humanity ignite its own flame, or did we inherit embers from a fire much older? When we stand in front of a cave painting, or walk among the stones of Göbekli Tepe, we are looking at the dawn of symbolic thought. We are seeing the moment humanity began to tell stories not only about itself, but about the world, the cosmos, the unknown. And perhaps, hidden in those early stories, are echoes of teachers we no longer remember, non-human predecessors whose gifts we still carry, their presence erased from stone but alive in memory. Our sudden leap is not only a scientific mystery, it is a philosophical one. It reminds us that intelligence is not only survival, but imagination. It asks us to wonder whether imagination itself might be an inheritance not only from our ancestors, but from rulers before us. If imagination marked humanity's sudden leap, then myth tells us how we understood it. Again and again, the world's oldest stories speak not of humans inventing knowledge, but of receiving it. Civilization, in these tales, is rarely a creation of our own. It is a gift. In Greek mythology, the figure of Prometheus embodies this theme. He is a titan, older than the Olympian gods, who takes pity on humanity, cold and fragile, struggling in the dark. From the divine realm, he steals fire and places it into human hands. Fire is not just warmth or light, it is technology, transformation, survival elevated to culture. For this theft, Prometheus is punished, bound to a rock while an eagle eats his liver each day. The story lingers because it speaks to something deep, the sense that civilization came to us from beyond, that knowledge is not only invented but bestowed, and that it carries a cost. In Egypt, Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom, is credited with giving humanity writing, mathematics, astronomy, and magic. He is not imagined as human but as something other, a hybrid being who bridges worlds. His gifts are not trivial. They are the very foundation of civilization, the ability to record memory, measure time, and read the heavens. To the Egyptians, such knowledge was divine, too profound to have arisen solely from human hands. In Mesoamerica, Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, descends as a teacher. He brings maize, the staple of life, and with it agriculture, calendars, and moral codes. He does not merely rule, he instructs, shaping humans into something more than they were. His form itself is symbolic, serpent and bird, earth and sky, a hybrid bridging realms. His knowledge is likewise a bridge, linking humanity with something greater. Even in Mesopotamia, the birthplace of writing, the Sumerians told of the Anunnaki who descended from the heavens to bestow agriculture, crafts, and governance. Civilization itself was framed not as invention but as inheritance, structured and delivered by beings older and wiser. These are not isolated stories. Across cultures, legends repeat the motif: knowledge as gift, civilization as inheritance. In Polynesia, Maui slows the sun and lifts islands from the sea, shaping the world for humanity's use. In the Andes, Viracocha emerges from the waters, bringing light, law, and order to the people. In India, the Nagas guard hidden wisdom beneath rivers and lakes, knowledge accessible only through their permission. Why do cultures separated by oceans and centuries imagine civilization as something given, not invented? One explanation is humility. Early humans, confronted with the vastness of the world, may have felt too small to claim such power as their own. To plant seeds and harvest crops, to map stars and measure time, to build temples aligned with solstices, these must have seemed too miraculous to be human. So they told stories of gods and teachers, cloaking human ingenuity in divine robes. But another explanation lingers, one that leans into speculation. What if these myths preserve the memory of genuine inheritance? What if fragments of knowledge were passed down, not imagined, from predecessors now lost? Survivors of earlier intelligences, emerging after catastrophe, might have guided early humans, offering seeds of agriculture, fragments of astronomy, techniques of construction. Over time, their strangeness would have been mythologized, their gifts remembered not as survival but as divinity. Consider Göbekli Tepe, older than agriculture, yet built with monumental skill. Hunter-gatherers were not supposed to build temples, yet they did. Could they have received guidance, knowledge carried forward from an earlier age? Consider the sudden flowering of cave art, symbolic expression blooming almost simultaneously across continents. Could such synchronicity suggest inspiration, or even instruction, from a source beyond human invention? Even if no such beings ever walked among us, the persistence of these myths is striking. They repeat the same theme: knowledge is not ours alone. It comes from elsewhere, from beings older, wiser, non-human. Whether sky gods, serpent kings, or culture bringers, the story is the same. We are heirs, not creators. And perhaps that instinct is true in a deeper sense. Civilization is cumulative. Each generation inherits from the last. Each discovery is built on earlier ones. In that way, all knowledge is gift. But myths take this further, pushing inheritance back beyond humanity itself, into realms of gods, spirits, and forgotten rulers. Speculatively, these myths may be cultural fossils, fragments of memory preserved through story, distorted but enduring. If earlier intelligences once ruled, if survivors once walked among our ancestors, then the myths of Prometheus, Thoth, Quetzalcoatl, and the Anunnaki might be echoes of their presence. Not literal history, but refracted memory, carried across millennia until the details were lost, but the essence remained. We were given something we did not invent. So when we hear these stories, perhaps we should listen not only for imagination, but for inheritance. Perhaps the myths of inherited knowledge are not simply allegories, but the last whispers of encounters with others who came before. And perhaps our own leap into imagination was not entirely ours, but the result of a gift a hand extended from the shadows of forgotten worlds. Up to this point, our wondering has mostly circled around beings that resemble us in some way: reptilian rulers, cephalopod thinkers, serpent gods, sky kings. They are strange, yes, but they still inhabit familiar categories. Creatures with bodies, with eyes and hands, with the capacity to shape stone, tell stories, or pass on knowledge. But what if intelligence does not need to look like us at all? What if civilizations could exist in forms we can barely conceive, their presence invisible not because it is absent, but because it is alien to our expectations? We often equate civilization with tools and monuments, cities of stone, machines of metal, towers rising against the sky. Yet these are human expressions, born of our biology and environment. They are not the only possible ways intelligence might manifest. If the Earth has hosted other minds, they may have built civilizations that left no pyramids, no walls, no ruins, only traces we cannot yet recognize. Consider the oceanic model. An aquatic intelligence might never have needed fire, metal, or stone. In the fluid environment of the sea, permanence is difficult, and mobility is everything. Such beings might have built societies woven into coral reefs, kelp forests, or migratory schools. Their communication could have been bioluminescence, pulses of light across skin, or vibrations carried through currents. Their culture might have been embodied not in objects, but in living forms, biological architecture, schools of creatures acting as collective cities, knowledge stored in patterns of behavior. When extinction came, nothing of this would fossilize. To us, it would look like nature. To them, it might have been civilization. Now consider a biological model. What if an intelligence did not separate itself from life, but integrated with it? Imagine beings who mastered biotechnology long before humans discovered metal, who cultivated living organisms as tools, shelters, even infrastructure. Their machines might have been forests designed to respond to their needs, vines woven to grow into bridges, symbiotic creatures engineered for specific roles. Nothing of this would remain in the fossil record because it would decay as naturally as plants and flesh. To us, it would vanish. To them, it might have been an entire world of crafted life. Or imagine an energy-based model. Life on Earth as we know it is carbon-based, built on chemistry. But what if consciousness could arise from processes not tied to flesh, but to energy flows, plasma filaments in the upper atmosphere, or electrical currents in the deep ocean crust? Such intelligences might have existed for millions of years, vast and slow, perceiving time in scales we cannot imagine. They would not need tools or monuments. Their civilization might have been a choreography of storms, a harmony of magnetic fields, a dialogue of lightning. How could such a presence leave traces for us to read? Perhaps it could not, and yet, Perhaps its memory lingers in myths of sky gods, thunder beings, or elemental rulers. There is also the collective model. Intelligence does not need to be individual. Ant colonies and beehives already show us how complex behaviors can arise from simple units working together. What if a species developed not as individuals but as superorganisms, their civilization being the colony itself, spread across landscapes, growing, adapting, reorganizing? They might never have built cities because they themselves were cities. When their time ended, they would leave behind only traces of soil and tunnels, indistinguishable from natural formations. These alternate models remind us how narrow our expectations are. We look for stone and metal because those are what we make. We look for writing because we write. But intelligence may not express itself through monuments or machines. It may leave no record we would recognize. Its ruins may be coral reefs, storm patterns, genetic codes, or something we cannot yet imagine. And if that is so, then the Earth may have hosted many civilizations without our knowing. They may have risen and fallen, their presence lost not because it was erased, but because it never looked like what we call civilization. This possibility forces us to rethink what it means to be intelligent. Is it tool-making, language, art? Or is it adaptation, complexity, communication in any form? By that broader measure, octopuses, dolphins, even forests show forms of intelligence. Could some of these have flowered further into civilizations invisible to us? Speculatively, this also reframes myth. When cultures tell of sky beings, serpent gods, or nature spirits, perhaps they are not only allegories but faint memories of alternate intelligences, beings whose civilizations were so unlike ours that only fragments of their presence could be translated into human story. And perhaps the reason we have not found ruins is simple. We are looking for the wrong kind. We seek pyramids, gears, writing. But if another intelligence once ruled in ocean currents, in forests of living tools, in storms of energy, we would not find their monuments. We would walk through them without seeing. We would touch them without knowing. So alternate models of intelligence invite us to humility. They remind us that our way is only one way. That the human model cities, machines, stone and steel is not inevitable but contingent. And that the absence of ruins is not proof that Earth was empty before us. When we open ourselves to this possibility, the world itself becomes more mysterious. The ocean may hold stories not of fish but of thinkers. The forest may conceal not only life but craft. The skies may whisper not only storms but conversations. And the rocks may carry not only the traces of geology but the erasures of civilizations too alien for us to see. Across the stories we have wandered tonight of reptilian rulers, cephalopod minds, serpent kings, and forgotten cities, one theme rises again and again: that endings are not truly ends. In myth and memory, in geology and silence, what vanishes is also transformed. Civilizations fall, but their echoes drift into stone, into story, into archetype. Death, whether of a species or a culture, is less an erasure than a return, a folding back into the Earth's deeper rhythms. And this leads us to the most intimate of questions. If entire worlds can vanish and yet whisper still, what of us? When our own lives end, do we vanish into nothing? Or do we step back into something older, a memory, a pattern, a civilization beyond time itself? Perhaps death is not departure, but homecoming. Cultures across the globe tell us this in their own way. The Egyptians spoke of the field of reeds, a perfected reflection of life where the dead continue their work in peace. The Norse told of Valhalla, a hall of ancestors where warriors feast beside gods. The Greeks imagined the Elysian fields, a place of endless twilight for the blessed. In every case, the end is framed not as silence, but as return to community, to continuity, to a greater story that outlives the self. So perhaps the central question is not only whether Earth was ruled before us, but whether we ourselves are ever truly lost. When we die, do we vanish like smoke in the wind? Or do we rejoin the oldest civilization of all, the eternal chorus of voices that has always surrounded us, unseen but waiting? Picture it now, in the quiet of the night, great gates opening in the darkness. Not gates of stone or iron, but something older, vaster, woven of memory and myth. Beyond them, not emptiness, but sound, faint at first, then rising. Voices, countless voices, layered with time, whispering and singing. The voices of all who have gone before, human and perhaps not human, welcoming us back into the endless continuity of Earth's forgotten rulers. And with that image, let us rest. For whether we are the first or only the most recent, we are part of this larger cycle. A chapter in a book too vast to finish, a note in a song too ancient to end. The gates are open, the voices are waiting, and for now, we carry the torch until it is our turn to return home.